When you hear the desert calling, you have to answer, you have to follow. Alkali Albert Thornburg, had been the messenger boy for General Miles in the last of the Apache Wars. And he would go on horseback from Tubac, Arizona into Los Angeles, San Bernardino. He would pass through this valley. Every once in a while he'd see through the hills, a little V-shaped, he'd see palms sticking up. So one day he came and investigated. And after he found the place, after 1902, he applied for a homestead, and he took up 80 acres. So when Dad came, on the third day, Al came out and he says, "Wilhelm, I like those two mules very much, and that buckboard is the best built I've ever seen. Would you consider swapping the homestead for that?" And Dad was struck dumb. He didn't know what to do. So he said, yes, I would consider it. And so they drove into Riverside and consummated the trade. And it became a famous swap in Riverside County.
I'm a desert rat. I've been here about 12 years, I guess. I came down here on one weekend, took a liking to it, got a job, came back on Monday morning, been here ever since.
Well, at nighttime, you know, it's quiet and the breeze comes along, and it's just really serene. It hasn't been conquered, I guess you could say.
It's the desert and her secrecy. And the very fact that she is holding a secret out to us that's unexplainable and unknowable makes you want to continue looking for it.
Some 90 miles southeast of Los Angeles, on the fringe of California's Mojave Desert, lies an area of spectacular scenery and warm winter weather, one of the fastest growing places in the United States, with desert communities springing up almost overnight. It is the Coachella Valley. Because it is developing so fast, planners project that 90% of the valley's natural habitat will be permanently lost by the turn of the century.
I've seen the city of Palm Springs change from a village. We used to just write village on the envelope and send it 8,000 residents to really the second largest city in Riverside County.
Development started here in the 20s and 30s in Palm Springs. And then over the years, this has become a prime area for tourism and for second homes. And development has gone this way along the Cove area in the Coachella Valley. But as development occurs and we get more population, the development starts to go out toward the center of the valley. You can conceive that in the future, there will be development all the way out to Interstate 10.
We long ago ran out of our own domestic indigenous water supply, and we have to import water from the Colorado River, filter it down into our water basin, and repump it where we need it in order to support this massive use of water that we're using. And water is the only way that you stabilize the soil around here. And it wasn't until the massive infusion of capital investments that we began to see that people could, in fact, go out into the middle of the valley, build massively expensive wind protection systems, and make it work through the use of money and engineering.
What this means in the not-too-distant time that all of the valley floor will be covered with developments. There's absolutely no getting away from it.
One of the things that attracts people to the desert is the feeling of open space. A very important reason, the psychological freedom and the feeling that you're not shut in, is a very important reason why people find the desert to be an environment that they like.
But you know, it's really one of the prettiest spots, any place where you've got native palms like that. Like Willis Palms is a beautiful outcropping, and Thousand Palms. Any place that we can preserve in its natural state like that, boy, I'd do anything in the world to get that done, because I was always scared to death that somebody was going to develop that and make a subdivision or some golf club or something. But if we can preserve an area like that in its natural state, boy, that'll be the finest thing we ever did.
In the fall of 1980, the Nature Conservancy, with the assistance of the Richard King Mellon Foundation, undertook a study of problems facing the Coachella Valley. This study was part of the Conservancy's ongoing program to identify and protect natural areas of national significance. It drew upon the information already collected by local, state, and federal agencies, the scientific community, and longtime residents. As a result of this study, a preserve has been designated which includes mountains, the source of water and sand, a natural wash area through Thousand Palms Canyon, and the resulting sand dunes downwind. The San Andreas Fault runs through the preserve and displaces underground water to the surface, enough water to sustain a line of fan palm oases along the fault.
In designing any preserve, we always look at ecological considerations rather than political boundaries or ownership boundaries to determine what is necessary to protect a viable example of the habitat or habitats or species that we're attempting to protect. Consequently, we have designed a piece that is upwards of 16,000 acres that will bring in enough of the water, the upper watershed, the sand source, the canyon through which it flows, the oasis which is along the San Andreas Fault, the deposition of sand, and the sand dunes for mostly endemic species that are endangered. It's unusually big, but consequently it will be probably very protectable. Not probably, will be very protectable.
One of the things that people don't realize, you look at this country, and it appears totally devoid of any life, and you'd be out here at the right time of the day or right time of the year. That's really true on the surface. But in this area you're looking at the moment, so far we've recorded over 130 species of plants and over 100 species of vertebrate animals right in this location. About 10 years ago, some of us started to try to get an ecological reserve established here in the valley because we could see at that time the direction in which conditions were going. And so we decided that the only chance we had of saving some habitat would be to get some organism listed on the threatened or endangered list of either the state or the federal government. And looking at all the organisms that occur here, we decided to use the fringe-toed lizard as our tool because the particular lizard world's distribution occurs only in the Coachella Valley.
The lizard is simply an indicator of the habitat that's endangered. Species get listed, habitats don't. we're really trying to preserve the habitat for the fringe-toed lizard and all the associated species, and not just the fringe-toed lizard. So we really have to look beyond an individual element to the whole thing. It's a whole living system. Living systems need enough area to survive as a system.
The mountains are all solid rock, and so when you get 5 inches of rain in 1 hour, very little of it can sink in, and it just roars off of those mountains. This is where it all starts. The rock heats up in the daytime and expands, and the sun goes down and immediately cools, and chips of rock are flying all over the place. And this coarse gravel falls down here. Then the floods take this coarse gravel and break it up into finer and finer gravel and push it down into the washes, which goes down through Thousand Palms Canyon and down into the flatlands below and deposits it in a big wide area there. And then the wind can pick that fine sand up and blow it along and give the fringe-toed lizard its habitat.
A lot of sand dunes and sandy areas are the most productive areas in the desert. Growth of plants that you normally don't associate with other desert soils allows more food for herbivorous insects, and that goes up the food chain. And so you get richer systems in sand.
The value of this land for scientific research, incalculable. There simply is no other area in the Coachella Valley where one can look at the interaction between sand-dwelling organisms and the environment.
Male feeding on a 10-millimeter sulfugid collected.
This is one of the hottest places. It's one of the driest places that there is on Earth. The efficiency of water conservation of desert organisms is absolutely astonishing. And they do things that you would not be able to predict from the data that you could get looking at similar organisms in more moderate environments.
This is the Coachella Valley fringe-toed lizard. It's fairly common in those areas where its habitat still exists. It's called the fringe-toed lizard because of the fringe-like scales on its hind toes. They increase the surface area of the lizard's foot and thus improve its traction on the loose sand in which it runs and buries itself. It has a flattened, wedge-shaped snout, which helps it knife into the sand, reducing resistance so that it can move into the sand easily. It also has a relatively flattened body in comparison with other lizard species, again, which minimizes friction.
The fringe-toed lizard has these wonderful adaptations for living in the sand. And my favorite one is that he's got 2 eyelids, so that when he dives into the sand, he won't get sand in his eyes. But if he does get sand in his eyes, the one eyelid goes like this and the other one goes like that to push it away. But if there's still a speck or 2 of sand in the eye, on the hind leg, the middle toe has a little toenail that he reaches around, and the toenail just fits into this slot of his closed eye, and he can wipe out that last little grain of sand with that toe. I love that adaptation.
To our knowledge, there's absolutely no biological problem with the fringe-toed lizard. The problem is habitat. The habitat is disappearing because of development. And since the animal was listed, development has been continuing.
There's a
great urgency at the present time because the Coachella Valley is one of the fastest growing places in the United States. Developers are readily looking at this area to build golf courses, condominiums, and at the present time also there is still a buffer around the proposed Coachella Valley Ecological Preserve that gives us some time, but not a lot, because developments are encroaching upon a couple of the borders at this very moment.
Right now we have the preserve pretty much intact. Already there's some farming going into the area, and it's zoned for farming. And once you go in there with farming, the development is right behind it. So we really have to make a decision right now whether we're going to put this preserve aside and stand tough to say it's important.
I have another question, Mr. Chairman. Doctor, do you feel that the developers in the area are working with your group to help preserve the...
We have just started meeting with the developers. I think that we can work together. And I think that's the only way we're going to be successful. Rather than having each of us on opposite sides fighting one another and ending up with a stalemate, I think by working with the developers, Nature Conservancy, Fishing...
Nature Conservancy is the only organization that I'm aware of that has the experience and the potential resources of coming into this area and actually acquiring some of the habitat, or at least being able to set up a situation so that the lands could be undeveloped for a period of time until a trade with a government agency could be made, or until other funds become available through donations by other developers in the Coachella Valley.
We are, as an organization, built on the premise that a resolution can be formed through meeting a number of different interests rather than pursuing a diversity or disparity of interests. This is a big site. It's going to take a big effort, and therefore an organization, frankly, like the Conservancy, is the one best suited to do it.
Recommend adoption of specific plan number 181 and also adopt the a negative declaration for environmental assessment 16995. Need a second.
Oh, I will second.
Okay. It's been moved by Mr. Olson, seconded by Mrs. Beedling. May we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Brisson?
Aye.
Mrs. Beedling?
Aye.
Mr. Purviant?
Aye.
Mrs. McGregor?
Aye.
Mr. Steffi?
Aye.
Mr. Olson?
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan?
Motion is carried.
It in fact worked, and it's done, and we're on our way. So we'll plan on meeting you tomorrow.
We're going to get it done.
Friday.
Good.
Thanks again.
Bill, thanks a lot.
You're sure welcome.
Again, appreciate your coming here and spending all this time. It's important that this reserve be created, in my mind, because over a period of time, probably 10 to 15 years, if this reserve isn't established, there won't be a fringe-toed lizard. There won't be many of the other kinds of species indigenous to the desert. It will be another phoenix. The desert will, in effect, be paved over. We kind of got on this side of the fence because the fringe-toed lizard, we knew of it in the past. It reared its head 3 or 4 years ago. Didn't bother us any. We were already in a project and didn't have a new project up for approval. But after it became an endangered species, then the real estate market fell apart, so nobody was doing anything. And we started this project up, and we're the first guys back in the block. And all of a sudden, out of a clear blue sky, we heard about the fringe-toed lizard all over again, which we thought had gone away. We were angry and concerned that we were being singled out to try to solve a problem that just can't be solved by any one person or any one group. And we were looking at all the ways we could to try to prevent having the problem, whether it be monetary, whether it be delays, which of course just cost money. And after we looked at the issue for probably 30 days, because it happened so quickly, we all of a sudden came to the conclusion that there is only one solution to this. It's not fighting it, because fighting it is never going to win it for anybody. They will not get their preserve. We will be continually fighting we'll be at cross purposes continually. And so we all of a sudden say, wait a minute, maybe there's a better way to do this. What we ought to be doing is joining with them to try to create the preserve so that, number one, it's created, and number two, we're not going to have the ongoing problem as we develop throughout the years. So we're going full speed ahead to spearhead this drive with the intention of getting that preserve purchased one way or the other.
I predict that less than 100 years from now, if we're successful in saving this ecological reserve, that the people in this valley are going to look upon this area with the same degree of affection that the people in New York City look at Central Park today. It'll be a very different type of situation, but nevertheless it will be about the only open space that will still be present here in the valley.
It is just places like this that will enable people that are in the valley now, as well as future generations, to acquire some solitude, to get some idea of what was here, and to develop their own personal land ethic and sense of wonder, because that's also important, as to how the system operates.
I see this preserve as being a marvelous chance to just be in the desert and yet within a metropolitan area, as this area is going to be eventually. But I know for the community, a preserve like that would just be special. And I'm thinking of the people who live here in the scientific community, the people who would want to come here to use it. And for the lizard.
How are you going to describe this, the sand dune ecosystem, to the next generation if it's not here?
We like the desert the way it is. Leave it that way.